Well, that's it from all of us here on Look North.
Join us again for the 10 o'clock news later this evening. Good night. Thank you, Keely, my love.
No worries.
You know, there have been nearly 13,000 editions of Look North, and I presented very close to 9,000 of them. I should get a live, shouldn't I? But that's only part of the story. Look North started in 1968, 50 years ago, and we've covered everything in that time, from the momentous to the absolutely ridiculous. So, as we celebrate 50 years of Look North this weekend, let's take a nostalgic trip back in time, shall we? And remember some of the presenters, reporters, and some of those news stories that I'm sure you'd all love to see again. As they used to say in the trade, run BT. A church hall in Leeds is an unlikely place to start a TV station, but this is where it all began for Look North. News editor Bill Greaves was in charge of getting the programme on air, but the location was less than ideal.
It was just an empty church with rubble and stuff all over the floor. And Bill said, okay, you've had your joke. Let's go and see the studio location. And there was a deathly moment where they said, Bill, this is it.
It felt like a converted church hall, which is what it was. And we used to have to clear out quickly for the scouts on Tuesday nights, things like that, you know. And the equipment was dire.
The BBC was trying to launch its news programme before ITV could transmit theirs.
Up, Dad!
BBC North from Leeds.
2, 1, on film. Stand by to cue, Harry.
Line 1 next.
And as the first episode of Look North loomed, the programme had a big story on its hands.
We're coping. I see the breads eventually arrive, which people are crying out for more than anything else.
Once again, York had flooded, but this time Look North's cameras were there. As the drama unfolded, David Seymour was sent to cover the story, but never having done any TV before, he was literally about to be thrown in at the deep end.
You couldn't really make it up as a journalist, could you? But if you were making a television movie about starting a regional television operation, you'd say there must be floods in an ancient historic city. And this today was going to be my very first television broadcast. And looking at the water here, we wondered how we'd set about it. And there was a rescue boat just coming up to us there. And the cameraman said, get in the boat. He said, when you're in the boat, I'll cue you. I got in the boat and I sat there. And the cameraman said, cue. I said, cue? Oh, that means me to speak. And you know, I didn't know what I was going to say, except that Bill Greaves had said the reporters were going to be the presenters of the programme. So I thought, well, I better introduce this new output by the BBC for the first time, bespoke for Yorkshire.
Good evening from the new Look North from our new Leeds studios.
It was on a plate. There was stuff floating down the river at York, but we'd floated a programme on that same flood. We'd got on air.
Well, the situation in Bean Street now is getting rather congested, as you can see, with boats everywhere. The police force, they've got about 30 officers. In fact, York today is looking almost like a little Venice.
The floods had got Look North off to a cracking start. Yorkshire voices were heard on the telly that night.
What's it like inside?
Well, it's well above the skirting boards, about 2.5 feet inside. You know, it's on the stairs and you can't get down, you know.
Elsewhere in the first programme, the new Tinsley Viaduct on the M1 made an appearance, and Barry Chambers reported on the East Coast fishing fleet.
The union have suggested an age limit of 17 for any boy who goes out distant water fishing.
And Eddie Waring popped up with the latest on horse racing from Middleham.
There are more acres in Yorkshire than there are letters in the Bible.
Away they go. The racing hounds are one of the North's oddest sports.
Look North was soon firmly established on the TV schedule, but it was all very different in those days. Presenters sometimes enjoyed a crafty fag whilst reading the news. Times may have changed, but the diet of stories has stayed the same. Never mind the beast from the east. We've been covering extreme weather stories for 5 decades. Go on, wake up, Hudson. According to my weather app, it's going to be sunny and cold today. What's been the biggest weather event you've covered?
Extraordinary extremes of every variety. I mean, the one that strikes me and strikes you probably is the most recent one, the December of 2010, and that month turned out to be the coldest December since 1890. So a remarkable departure from a series of winters that had turned increasingly mild. But the drought of 95 really sticks in the memory. You know, this was when they were bringing tankers of water from Kielder Reservoir in Northumberland and pumping it into Eckert Reservoir in Leeds because they thought Leeds was going to run out of water.
You've had a few reincarnations, haven't you?
One likes to keep up with events. Well, I started off with those ridiculous coloured jackets. They were very popular. I had 16 colours at one point.
16?
Yeah, and I've still got them upstairs, Harry.
When I first started on Look North, it was a weather caption. Brian Baines was in the corner and he used to bring out this children's weather caption. It's gone a long way since then, hasn't it?
Yeah, and did you tell me that even when you first started doing a weather presenter, it was on Friday only?
Friday only, had a full-time presenter.
I remember Alan Dorwood, Forward with Dorwood.
Yeah.
It's been miserable today. Alan, is it going to improve?
Well, it's been a rather very unsettled week, in fact, but the prospect for Sunday a little bit better, but only a little bit.
It's changed enormously, and of course the children's pictures, which were massively popular, that's morphed into viewers' pictures.
The technology's moved on, but the impact of bad weather is still the same. Remember 2007? The size and scale of the flooding in South Yorkshire took everyone by surprise. Tens of thousands were affected. But for stranded office workers by the River Don in Sheffield, the flooding was about to be an uplifting experience.
We came to work and it was absolutely chucking it down that day, but we didn't think anything of it. From looking out of our window, you could see that the cars that had been abandoned on the main road were starting to be submerged. And eventually we got a phone call from the RAF saying, we're going to come and get you.
An RAF helicopter from Leconfield in East Yorkshire had already rescued dozens of folk. Heather was next.
I'd never been winched up into a helicopter. I was relieved to be getting out of there, but yeah, it was quite frightening because it wasn't an experience obviously I'd been through before, and it was quite scary.
And I'm going to reintroduce you to somebody now who you might never have thought that you were going to meet again. The person who rescued you and winched you out. Here he is.
Hiya. Nice to meet you. You too. Thank you.
Winchman John Carrington thought he'd seen it all, but the floods of 2007 was something else.
It was just absolutely total chaos. Looking down from the air, the river itself, it was just absolutely torrential. It was just amazing to see. It was like seeing out of Waterworld, the film. It got people all over the place just waving, you know, shirts, T-shirts, waving anything that they could really to get our attention. Got winched down to Heather, tried to calm her down, reassure her that it was going to be safe to get winched up to the helicopter. It's quite a scary process. It's noisy, you're getting spun around quite a lot, but Heather was quite an easy winch really.
Were you all just so happy to get out of that horrible situation?
Definitely, definitely, because obviously we didn't know when it was going to come to an end, and this guy came and rescued us.
Weather stories have always been a big part of Look North, but back in the 70s, it wasn't the only topic dominating the headlines. Our cameras were there as Britain went through a period of radical change.
They're here to stop you going in! They've been brought here to stop you going in!
There were strikes and blackouts. There were times of great tragedy, including the loss of the whole trawler, the Gaul. And there was the Lofthouse Pit disaster.
Most of the miners managed to force their way through shoulder-deep water and escape, but 7 miners are missing.
But one story shocked the whole nation. Flixborough. It was Saturday, June the 1st, 1974, and an explosion ripped through the Nipro chemical plant near Scunthorpe. 28 people were killed. and 36 were injured. It was the biggest explosion in Britain since the Second World War.
The damage was just incredible. I mean, it did look like a small nuclear explosion, really.
Look North cameraman Paul Berriff was first on the scene. When you approached Flixborough, what did you see?
Well, as I got nearer, we're talking about a mile or two, all the sort of top 6 inches or so of all the crops in the fields were all levelled off. And the sound wave from the explosion had just sighed through the whole area.
Let's have a look at some of your footage, Paul. You can almost feel the heat. You were that close. How close were you? And just describe it to me.
Oh, yeah, just like a few hundred yards away from there, and you could feel the heat for several hundred yards around. It was unbelievable.
It was just like somebody opening the oven door and shutting it again, you know, a real heat bomb.
It was 10 times louder than the height of Alamein, which was, I thought, was hellfire itself.
The footage is remarkable. Paul was at the very heart of a disaster that was unfolding before his eyes. So come on, explain this. You're filming, everyone else is running away. What's all about?
No, this is the point. They'd just blown the whistle and everybody was fleeing out of the area, saying, get out of the area, get out of the area, it's going to go again. And then everybody started to run towards us, so I stayed where I was, panned the shot round with them, to see in the distance, in the crowd running away, my sound recordist as well.
You were frightened?
No. You're apprehensive, of course, and you're just watching in something like Flixborough in case it explodes again, and there's volatile materials there. So I'm still trying to record the events, because afterwards it's these pictures that, you know, they use in inquiries.
Flixborough dominated the news for weeks. After the explosion came the aftermath, as the shell-shocked residents picked up the pieces.
Is this your house? Yeah, it was, yeah. Was.
It's like a nightmare.
The images and reporting from Flixborough reflected on a terrible tragedy for the community. Look North later won a Royal Television Society Award for its coverage. The 70s marked another chapter in the history of Look North. We moved to Woodhouse Lane in Leeds, and it's where I came to report for duty when I first joined the BBC. The memories just flood back. This is my first full-time professional job working for Radio Leeds, and every morning I used to arrive on my Honda 50 and park it there. I was always told off for doing that. And then in the 80s I got my dream job, working for Look North, and what a decade that turned out to be. The Yorkshire Ripper's reign of terror came to an end. The disasters at Valley Parade and Hillsborough will always stay with us.
The Leppings Lane Gate has become a shrine in memory of those who died.
York Minster was badly damaged by fire. Hundreds of thousands came to see the Pope. And Bradford's Mohammed Ajib became Britain's first Asian Lord Mayor. The 1980s was very notable for me because I started presenting Look North in 1982. And the one thing I feel very privileged about is that I've been lucky. Yes, I've had so many wonderful partners who've held my hand. And here's one of them, Judith Stamper. Judith, you don't look a day older.
Harry, hey, listen, you don't either, but we're as young as we feel.
We are. Let's have a look at some of the great Look North moments. Look at, what about this title sequence? Do you remember this?
Oh, yeah, I think there were about 3 or 4 when we were... I like this one, though.
The whole thing, though, was so exciting, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah.
I used to feel anticipation before we went on
had some big stories as well, and we were at the heart of a changing world, I think, in the 80s.
Look how far apart we were. I'll sit here.
It's amazing, isn't it?
What I loved about what we did is we did some groundbreaking stuff as well, didn't we?
Oh, incredibly, because in those days we were the first.
In those days.
Because, well, you know, two-headed presenters, we were the first on Look North.
Yeah, we were.
So that, as I say, is just about it from the programme for tonight. Hope you've enjoyed it.
And of course we had some fun, didn't we?
Goodness me, you always did these kind of little items at the very end of the programme, so I couldn't answer you back. It was just awful.
So if you don't mind, it's good night from me and Judith. Pass the soap, please. Thank you. You shouldn't be in here, you know.
Oh, dear me.
Oh, no!
Oh,
Rick Mail. Rick Mail. This is still the piece that goes down as far as, you know, one of the great moments of Look North television.
I'm going to do the one thing that every man in Yorkshire wants to do. Come on, Jude, give us a snog.
Oh my God! Will I make it?
Now,
oh no! I didn't know what to do, Harry. I just didn't know what to do.
Now the television.
Again, it was at the very end. Just imagine if I had to do an item after this. Dennis Skinner believes the power stations have...
As you can see.
I didn't know this was happening either until I saw Mark Lawson, it was, the floor manager with the microphone, because you don't know when your own mic's gone.
One of the great things, of course, when you look back on Look North, is some of the characters who we met. About this vicar, he was bizarre.
Absolutely classic.
There's a mole there, I must get him.
This guy doesn't have a sense of humour at all. But the gun as well, shooting moles.
What happens if you didn't like his sermon?
The case of Mrs. Suggett is by no means untypical here in a...
Ken Cooper.
Ken.
Yeah.
Now, this is what not to do when you're about to do a piece to camera.
And as she points out, if there's no guarantee...
Don't work with animals, especially if they're on the hand.
I suppose our Look North royalty was Khaled as is.
Very much so. Very precise, very proper, clipped accent.
Just tell me once again, just how many staff did you have at the Willows?
There was always one great story about him loving and insisting on having Darjeeling tea.
Oh, in a gold cup.
Yeah, and one of the film editors, Mike Denby, who was a great character, changed it for Brook Bond PG tip, and he did not know the difference. I loved it. I love that.
3 of the other 5 officers on trial were also cleared for... Not doing too well here, are we?
If there's one of the funniest moments on Look North, it's got to really be Mike Smart, though. Do you remember this piece to camera?
Oh, the perfectionist. Oh, yes.
The drugs were reward for delivering information and setting up other drugs users who were... sorry.
Mike was a great reporter again, but an absolute perfectionist.
I'll get this right this time. I like to get these first in.
This is why I think he often took 10, 12 times to do a piece to camera, because he wanted to get it right.
Dunsmore was said to have pressed cannabis supplied by 2 of the defendants into the hand of a 22-year-old pop fan who... Oh, now I can't...
And this was hilarious. You just got to watch the reaction of the sound recordist, Graham Hupp, in the end. He'd done it about 20 times, and then this bagpipe started. The film cameraman continued with it.
That was the other great thing, the crews who went out with, of course.
Yeah,
they were characters in their own right.
I think that's our cue to move.
Oh, goodness. We've outstayed our welcome, Harry.
Judith and I fronted Look North for more than a decade, but we haven't been the only ones who've spent time in the Look North hot seat. See if you remember these faces.
Jimmy Rudd, what a magnificent player he was.
Michael Cook was a regular on our screens in the 70s.
Now the regional news. Good afternoon.
Later on, Sue Wilkins did her fair share of fronting the programme.
The Home Secretary, Kenneth Baker, telephoned...
Mike McCarthy moved from reporting in the field to becoming the main Look North presenter.
Police say efforts to improve the image of the force are working.
OK, get that racing line, girl.
Claire Frisbee was our daredevil. And Damien Johnson was our sports guy. Who can forget Krista? She fronted Look North with me for more than 10 years. And these days, there's our Amy, my co-presenter and tandem partner. There's only been a very small number of people who have actually sat in front of the Look North cameras on the sofa and presented Look North. So, can you imagine what was going through their mind on their first ever night? It was a daunting experience.
Good evening and welcome to the BBC News at 6. It was a baptism of fire. I had come from behind the camera, suddenly I was on camera.
This was a rundown arcade. Now, millions of pounds later, Harvey Nichols is turning this in Leeds into something of a fashion mecca.
I really enjoyed that, and then they threw me into the presenting, literally stuck me on air.
West Yorkshire police have been accused of using heavy-handed tactics in the way they tackled the Bradford riots in June.
I was terrified, absolutely terrified, and I stood there, and it's just that whole notion of going live on television.
That's all from me and from Sophie, making her debut appearance on Look North. Good night.
A couple of months later, they put me on to the main programme with the wonderful Mike McCarthy, and Mike and I started presenting the main show, Look North, and it was about 3 months before I stopped shaking.
Sophie soon found her feet, and then there was no looking back.
Happy birthday, Look North. It is a fantastic programme, and I still remember the connection that the audience has with the people who present it and the people who are on.
Sophie fronted Look North in the 1990s, when the news kept on coming. Our cameras captured the full drama of the fire at the Hickson and Welsh chemical factory in Castleford. There was also the Dunkeswick air crash near Leeds, which claimed 12 lives. Yorkshire went on a spending spree when the Meadowhall shopping centre opened. And what about these pictures when Scarborough's Holbeck Hall Hotel collapsed? But as the millennium began, we were gripped by a very human story. 6-year-old Sally Slater from North Yorkshire was desperately ill and needed a new heart. With a Europe-wide donor search underway, her family prepared for the worst.
Even if Sally does die, if we can do something to raise awareness for people to think a little bit more about organ donation, then at least it won't have been a complete waste.
We were told 2 or 3 times that she was going to die, that she wouldn't make it through the night. So so it was very close to the wire.
You've got to crack on with it. You don't have the option to just think, this is no good, we're getting out of here. You've got to battle on.
That very public appeal on Look North put organ donation at the top of the agenda. But a donor was found. And 18 years on, just look at Sally go.
I'm incredibly grateful for the generosity of what another family has given me and allowed me to do. I think they've made the ultimate sacrifice and given me the ultimate gift.
Back home near Malham, the Slaters have had nearly 2 decades to reflect on what was a real life-changing moment.
To think of the very, very darkest days to where we've got to now and just look at her and what she's achieved and what she continues to want to achieve, and that, you know, the way she lives her life is an example to anyone who goes through an illness and comes out the other side.
We returned to Sally's story many times, but there were other major headlines as we entered the 21st century. The derailment of an East Coast express train at Great Heck left 10 dead and more than 80 injured. Our cameras were in Bradford to record some of the worst civil disturbances we'd ever witnessed.
Missiles are being thrown, petrol bombs. This is now, at the minute, as you see it, a sustained assault on the police.
There were unforgettable scenes when Nelson Mandela was made a freeman of the city of Leeds. And in 2002, One Look North became 2, with my old mate Peter Levy fronting a brand new programme for East Yorkshire and Lincolnshire.
Yes, hello and welcome to the new Look North for Lincolnshire, East Yorkshire and North Norfolk.
Peter's now as much a part of the furniture as this thing, the Humber Bridge. It's an incredible sight, that, isn't it, Peter? It never ceases to amaze me.
Whenever you go away from Hull and then you come back in, either on the train down there or the car, you think, oh, I'm home, and it never loses its magic.
It seems like the bridge has been here forever, but we were there when it was being built in the 1970s.
Well, there's nothing revolutionary about this bridge. Its centre span may be 1,300 feet longer than that of the Severn Bridge, but the principle is exactly the same.
We were also there when it was opened by the Queen. Since then, a lot of water has passed under the bridge.
One of the biggest stories was 2007 and the floods. All this area, Hull, devastated. There was 9,000 homes and businesses flooded. And then a few years later, after 2007, 2013, and then there was the tidal surge.
The positive stories, though, there have been a few of those as well.
There have. If you look down the water that way, there's the Siemens plant at Alexandra Dock. £160 million investment. Employs 800 people. It makes turbine blades for offshore wind turbines. They're 75 metres long, and you, Harry, could walk along the inside of them. And that's really put Hull on the map.
I suppose the biggest thing must have been last year. I mean, there was a real buzz about Hull, wasn't there?
It was amazing. I mean, 3.5 million visitors to Hull for the events, worth so much. In the national spotlight, Look North making programmes that the whole country saw. Suddenly Hull walked with pride. They were happy about themselves. They thought, yeah, we're on the telly, we're on the telly.
Holstein, as the city of culture, showcased this part of the world to the rest of the nation. This event did too. The Grand Départ of the Tour de France in 2014 was so successful, it seemed everyone was talking about us. And who can forget when Yorkshire was right up there near the top of the 2012 Olympic medals table. Jessica Ennis, Nicola Adams and many others did us proud. But they're not the only heroes we followed. Roy Castle's brave fight against lung cancer was moving. Jane Tomlinson's courage was humbling, and her legacy lives on. But there's one Yorkshire hero who is inspirational as far as thousands of Look North viewers are concerned. And the one thing they always ask is, what is he doing next? I thought we'd find out. Ben Parkinson's story is one we've watched closely, but it began in the most difficult of times. Here was a family facing the reality of caring for their severely injured son after he was blown up in Afghanistan.
I think if we'd have realised at that time just how bad it could be and how bad his brain injury could have been, I don't think we'd have coped at all.
But Ben is a fighter, and despite his shattered body, he's refused to give up, and he has his family right behind him.
I wouldn't have been dead if it wasn't for my mum and dad. I would definitely have died.
It's an amazing life story, but for me, one moment stands out. Just tell me what you remember about 2012 and that incredibly emotional torch. You were surrounded by all your comrades in arms.
The thing that made the palace was our regiment was stood behind me. That made me feel amazing.
It was one of the best days of our lives, really. It all sort of sprung up from nowhere. We expected a fair crowd, just because it was the Olympic torch.
The Olympic Committee had said no flags, no uniforms, and there was Ben with 7 paras flag behind him, and it was just a moment in time, an amazing thing.
Up next for Ben is a trip to the Arctic and his singular determination to walk again. Why do you want to keep doing these things, Ben?
If you were told your life is over, you're going to die within a few weeks, and if you live, you'll be vegetable for the rest of your life. You're told that you never walk or talk again. Would you do everything to try and fulfill life again?
When will we see you walking in those?
Watch this space.
We will, I promise you. Ben's an inspiration, but he's just one of many amazing people we've featured in the last 50 years. So here's to the next 5 decades of Look North. I'm sure they'll be just as captivating.